All right, guys, we are in the throes of rookie mock draft season. Last week, we conquered a 2QB Superflex mock draft, and today we're going to be jumping into a single quarterback rookie mock draft for Dynasty Fantasy Football. I think it's going to be a really fun exercise to explore the nuance of how player valuations change in between the two different league formats, between the obvious devaluation of the quarterback position. So as always, like the video, subscribe to this channel, leave a comment down below whether you agree or disagree with the landing spots, and I'll see you after that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football. I'm really glad I saw such a positive support of the Superflex rookie mock draft. Was already going to make a single quarterback mock draft, as was alluded to in that video, but with the great engagement with that in video, it just makes me more excited to do a single quarterback mock draft today, and we're going to be getting into it on Sleeper, my preferred platform of choice for Dynasty Fantasy Football. I know last video with the Superflex mock draft was insanely long, almost an hour, so I'm going to try to cut it down a little bit, but as I am still trying to grow this channel, continuous growth is always the goal here. So I'm still going to sound like if you've been watching the channels, if you've been watching some of the post-draft analysis of the positions, there's going to be a lot of repetition of information and of landing spots and of talent evaluations of these rookies, but I'll try to keep it brief and keep this draft moving so we can conclude in a timely manner. I think it's going to be a very fun exercise, just exploring the nuance of how player evaluations shift up and down based on the different format of the league. This is not a tight end premium league, as I think those are much rarer than, you know, draft media or fantasy football media would make you out to believe. But I just think that outside of the obvious devaluation of the quarterback position, there are certain positional valuations that need to be accounted for in a two quarterback to a single quarterback league. So with that being said, I think I've covered all the, prerequisite work. Let's jump in to this mock draft. And obviously we're starting out here with the 101 to absolutely no one's surprised. It's Bijan Robinson, basically the greatest fantasy football asset, the greatest, the dynasty wonder child since Saquon Barkley, since Adrian Peterson. I mean, this is a guy that people have been looking forward to in dynasty for years and years and years. Again, one of the more coveted picks in recent memory, having the 101 in 2023. I've seen these picks go for absolutely bonkers valuations and trades. I've seen people throwing 3 to 4 first round picks just to move up 6 or 7 spots to get to this 101 take Bijan Robinson. Obviously a guy that is landing spot agnostic, but certainly does not hurt going to a majorly run-focused offense under Arthur Smith with the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, in Superflex, in 1QB, it's not a question. Bijan Robinson is the clear 101. Moving on to the 102, I'm going to stick with Jahmyr Gibbs, a very similar valuation as you saw in the Superflex draft. I also had the second skill position player coming off the board was Jahmyr Gibbs. Just because I think he's going to, reap value sooner than the consensus 101 or the consensus number 1 wide receiver. Jahmyr Gibbs, again, he's been talked about as not just a running back for the Detroit Lions offense, but as an offensive weapon going to be used heavily in the pass game, lining up in the slot as well. I think with them shipping off DeAndre Swift gives me a ton of confidence in what the Lions have planned for Jahmyr Gibbs, as well as Jameson Williams is going to be serving that 6-game suspension for gambling. So plenty of opportunity for Jahmyr Gibbs. And again, he's just going to have immediate production from day one. He will be a top 12 redraft running back in my estimation at this point. So as someone who's going to play the odds and play the game of fantasy football, I think having an asset that generates immediate return on a value, and even if you're not the biggest Jahmyr Gibbs fan, you can flip him almost immediately for more value than you can flip Jackson Smith and Jig before. So unless you're truly a insanely wide receiver needy team, I would generally try to go for the immediate value of Jahmyr Gibbs. And also, I mean, without saying Jackson Smith and Jig is going to be the third position player off the board, but something else I forgot. I thought I covered all my bases before the video. I'm going to stop here and take a little pause and say this is where I generally think you should be taking all these players in a one QB rookie draft. This is not to say that you should abide by this entirely. And this also doesn't abide entirely by my post-draft rankings. The way I'm going to draft today is going to be an amalgamation of both my post-draft rankings as well as consensus market value of these players. And obviously, you don't have to pick Jackson Smith and Jigba at the 103, but obviously, you know, within 2 or 3 spots of these players moving up and down based on your personal feelings, I think I would consider that not a reach. Obviously, the quote-unquote standard for a reach in the first round, obviously, if you take Addison up here at the 102, people will call that a reach. But if we get into the 3rd round and you're taking a guy at the 302 that I have at the 306, that'd be considered less of a reach. But this is just generally where I think you should be taking players based on their potential upside as well as consensus market valuation. And if it is a major discrepancy with your current position and where you want to take a player or where I have them ranked on this board, feel free to try to explore a trade down, even if it is not for a ton of tremendous value. Just gathering any assets and still taking the same player is obviously going to be a boon. For example, not to get sidetracked too much, if you're a big Addison guy, but you're sitting here at the 103, like me, I would rather have Addison than Jackson Smith and Jigba. I would be trying to get a 3rd rounder maybe next year to swap places with this guy. Obviously, you could see people giving up a 2nd rounder, giving up a lot more value, and moving down just 1 spot here for a 3rd rounder might not be the best value and might in the long run be a mistake. But if I'm truly sold on Addison and I can pick up just that modicum of extra value to bolster my team, I'm absolutely doing it. So that's just kind of gives an explanation to how I'm building this draft and why I'm putting the players where they are, apart from the superficial explanations that I'm giving per draft. Jackson Smith and Jigba, I don't think he went to the best situation. For me, that would be Addison. But obviously, this is a position or a positional pick that you hope pays off 2 or 3 years down the line. Again, Tyler Lockett is nearing a cliff. I think he's going to be productive for 2 or 3 more seasons, but after that, you're going to see Jackson Smith and Jigba step up into a much bigger role in that Seattle Seahawks offense. We've seen in the past, even with the heavy focus on the run game from Pete Carroll, there should certainly be a ton of opportunity for Geno Smith or whatever quarterback is helming that Seahawks-led offense to sling the ball, and Jackson Smith and Jigba should get plenty of work. And I just think as far as talent goes, he is the most talented wide receiver in this draft class. And I like to say, if all else fails, draft talent above everything else. And I'm going to go pick Jackson Smith and Jigba here at the 103 just based on consensus value, as well as I believe he is the most talented wide receiver. So with no surprise to anyone, I'm picking Jordan Addison. I know QJ is ranked a little bit higher for sleeper, and a lot of people like his traits a little bit better. I just think Jordan Addison is a much more polished prospect, much better catcher of the football, much better route runner, much better technician. I think Devonta Smith walked so Jordan Addison can run. He's never going to be the wide receiver 1 in that Minnesota Vikings offense, but he doesn't have to be. He can be a great number 2 wide receiver to Justin Jefferson, who is arguably the greatest wide receiver in the NFL at the current moment. And with Addison, we've seen a lot of good wide receiver 2s be impactful for fantasy. Look at a T. Higgins, look at a Jalen Waddle, look at a Devonta Smith. And that's really, I think, a very achievable goal for Jordan Addison. And I think he's actually going to return more immediate production than Jackson Smith and Jigba. So I'm a huge, huge Addison fan. Moving on. We're going to go with Quentin Johnson. Maybe not my favorite player in this draft, but again, we're not going to make the mistake that a lot of us made with Jahan Dotson last year. We're going to continue to value these players in fantasy football the same way that the NFL teams value these players. Quentin Johnson, again, I don't think he's as polished as Jordan Addison. He has the traits. He's a bigger wide receiver, obviously more athletic, more explosive, jumps higher, runs faster. But there are certain things that do concern me at Quentin Johnston. He doesn't win at the catch point like you would see a bigger bodied wide receiver like him do, which is really, really concerning because that's kind of what his selling point was coming into the league. And also, I kind of view him as an athlete that plays wide receiver rather than an athletic wide receiver. So I think he has a lot of work to do to become polished as a route runner and as a wide receiver in the NFL. But if he can put in that work and really develop his skill set as a wide receiver, he can be a tremendous player, and I love the upside. So Quentin Johnson is going to be here at the 105. At the 106, this is where you want to, people will talk about Dalton Kincaid, maybe another running back. I think it is pretty clearly Zay Flowers here. Again, I'm just following the draft capital. I'm not the biggest fan of Zay Flowers, as has been discussed in my post and pre-draft rankings of the wide receiver prospects in the 2023 class. I don't like how undersized he is. I do think he's an outlier when it comes to that facet. Also not coming from the ACC. I think it's going to be a major adjustment for him, especially playing in a loaded AFC North conference. But with the fact that he went to Baltimore, the fact that they used first-round draft capital on him, Lamar is going to be there for the next 5 years. Odell's only there for 1 year. Rashad Bateman is having trouble staying healthy. And the fact that Lamar was instrumental in the Ravens recruitment of Zay Flowers gives me enough confidence in the Ravens organizations that they're going to be using him as a valuable asset in the wide receiving game, especially under the new offensive coordinator Todd Monken, who is very famous user of the air raid system. So we should see a vast departure from the previous system that was run in Baltimore, and I think Zay Flowers will get tons of play. So I think taking her at the 106, definitely not a reach or something you should be concerned about whatsoever. At the 107, I'm going to take Anthony Richardson. And something you'll notice is that every single time we hit a quarterback, it's going to be another teardrop. So these first 6 players here are guys that I have insanely high hit rates on, or I project to be insanely high hit rates. Guys that I think are well over 75% for some of these guys, maybe a little bit more close to that 75% mark, but 75% hit rate's a pretty good mark for fantasy football. And guys that I feel extremely, extremely confident in drafting. And then obviously we're going to throw in a quarterback here, and then there's going to be a drop off to the next tier of players that are going to be a little bit more lower hit rate. But Anthony Richardson, while there is debate in Superflex whether Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson should be the first quarterback off the board, just because of how valuable the quarterback position is, and there's only 32 of them to go around. I think in a single quarterback format, you have a lot more flexibility to take shots on guys that have that insane upside. You're going to need a real differentiator at the quarterback position. So we see in one quarterback leagues, guys, people that win have those Lamar Jackson type players with the breakout seasons, have the Josh Allens with the insane rushing upside. Jalen Hurts led a lot of people to the promised land this past year. So I think it's pretty clear in one quarterback systems, you are going to aim for the upside of Anthony Richardson and his rushing ability. Obviously in Superflex, the consistency is a little bit more valuable. So a Kirk Cousins, a Jared Goff, a Bryce Young, their value is exponentially higher in Superflex, where the commodity is much, much more limited, which I could see why Bryce, being an intellectual student of the game, being much more valuable in Superflex. But here I am taking that shot on the upside because that's what you need, a differentiator at the quarterback position to win in a one quarterback league. So moving on to the 108, I'm going to go here and I'm going to take Kendre Miller. And you might be thinking, wait, hold up, Dalton Kincaid, why are you passing over a first round tight end? And I think this is something that we should talk about as far as valuations in terms of positional values outside of the obvious devaluation of the quarterback. In my Superflex mock draft, I had Dalton Kincaid right after Zay Flowers as far as the skill position players off the board. But in a one quarterback league, I think the tight end position is devalued. Let's say you're starting 10 players in both Superflex and one quarterback leagues, but you're immediately decreasing the number of skill position players in a Superflex league because 2 of those 8 positions are filled up by quarterbacks. Now you only have 8 positions, and the percentage of which a tight end is valuable increases. If you have 10 spots in your starting roster in a one quarterback league, how many times are you going to be starting multiple tight ends? No, more so rather than not, you're going to be having 2 running backs, maybe 2 flexes of running backs and wide receivers, probably 3 to 4 wide receivers. So the running back and the wide receiver, I think, are much more valuable than the tight ends in one quarterback than Superflex, just because the percentage of which they can contribute to your roster outside of the quarterback position, while marginally higher, is still higher in one quarterback. So I'm taking my shots here on some of the running backs and wide receivers prior to going in on a tight end. So Kendre Miller, it was between Kendre Miller and Zach Charbonnet for me. So we'll go ahead and talk about these guys tangentially, just because Zach Charbonnet is going to be at the 109 here. I just think Kendre Miller has a more palpable path to the field. Alvin Kamara obviously has a lot of legal issues not only was he old and unproductive last year, but now he's going to be facing indictment on those legal issues back at the Pro Bowl in Las Vegas 2 years ago. And per the NFLPA regulations, in every single contract, there is a stipulation with which a player is slapped with charges. The contract can be immediately terminated at cause. And I think with the high draft investment of the New Orleans Saints and Kendre Miller, gives me a pretty clear indication that as soon as those charges come down, they're going to be executing that clause and removing Alvin Kamara from their roster. Yes, they have Jamal Williams as a backup, but he is in his late 20s. Kendre Miller, I think, is a very, very talented running back and in a great situation down there in New Orleans. So he's going to be the guy that I take over Charbonnet. Charbonnet obviously follows him right there at 109. Let's not forget, post-draft, with the absolute massacre that Pete Carroll did to Kenneth Walker. I'm a huge Kenneth Walker fan. So I was obviously devastated by what Pete Carroll did in the second round with Zach Charbonnet. However, you can't forget how talented this guy is. He is a big-bodied back compared to most of this draft class and most of the running backs in general that we see in the NFL. Over 6 feet, 215 pounds. Great pass-catching ability for a bigger-sized back. Something I've highlighted, he's just one of the more powerful backs in this draft class. Dare I say more powerful than Bijan Robinson. I always laugh at the highlight tape of Zach Charbonnet taking a handoff from Dorian Thompson-Robinson at UCLA. And DTR doesn't get his handoff in time. And Zach Charbonnet just ends up pulling DTR as well as the football into the end zone. I mean, the dude is just an absolute workhorse. And I don't think it should be to his discredit that he is drafted to the Seattle Seahawks. I think he will have plenty of volume. And if Kenneth Miller does happen to get injured, Zach Charbonnet could be a league winner in some instances. Again, it's hard to doubt the talent of a running back like Zach Charbonnet, especially compared to the hit rates of the guys we're going to talk about afterwards. So at the 109, this is where I see Zach Charbonnet fitting in. At the 110 here, this is finally where we see a tight end come off the board, and it's Dalton Kincaid. While I personally like Michael Mayer a little bit more than Dalton Kincaid as a pure tight end, I think the rumors around Dalton Kincaid is that he's not going to be used as a pure wide tight end. That's still Dawson Knox's role with the Buffalo Bills. They gave him a 4-year extension last offseason, and he's not going anywhere anytime soon. Definitely has a great rapport with Josh Allen, and is great. Really on the same wavelength as him as far as blocking. So Dalton Kincaid was really brought in to be that second pass catching option behind Stephon Diggs. I don't think this is going to be a slight to Stephon whatsoever, as I think the person that this impacts the most would be a Gabe Davis type player. But Dalton Kincaid, if he can come in, I'm not a huge fan of the fact that he's already 25 years old, but maybe that maturity can be a boon for him in the NFL, as it takes a little bit less time to transition to the NFL scheme. Obviously, we see tight ends. What makes me so adverse to tight ends is the fact that they normally take 2 to 3 years to be relevant for fantasy football, but maybe his maturity, as well as not being used as a true all-around do-it-all tight end, Dalton Kincaid can make that adjustment to a pass catcher and fantasy relevant role more quickly than tight ends in recent history. After here, we're going to go back to the running back pool, and it's going to be Devon Achane, a guy that I talked ad nauseum about in my Superflex mock draft. Not a huge fan of Achane. I think, again, a lot of people have said he's the best ball darling, and I would agree. He's going to have a lot of opportunity. He's going to not have a ton of opportunity, but what he does with that opportunity, he could certainly be a home run hitter, or he could leave you wanting more. Definitely could be, some 7 touch games for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns, or it could be a 5 touch game for 21 yards and 1 pass through the air for 7 yards. There's so many weapons on that Miami Dolphins offense. He's a guy that, especially in year 1, is going to be wildly inconsistent, which is why I value both Kendre and Zach Charbonnet over him. I think as he matures in the NFL, matures into his role, he could certainly settle into a more valuable role. Obviously, Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson with the Miami Dolphins are only on 1-year contracts, so he could clearly be the number 1 back as early as next year. So I like that path to relevancy and the path to the field. However, I'm just not the biggest Achane fan, just because I do not believe he has a consistency to be a fantasy relevant asset outside of best ball, because you are actively trying to figure out your best lineup week in and week out, and he's going to be a headache. Honestly, like Kyle Pitts was last year. You didn't know if he was going to have a good game or a bad game. So just with the name value alone, with the hype coming out of the Miami Dolphins offense, I would not pass on him here at this point. I think just as far as value-wise, you could probably flip him into a ton of great value, or flip this pick into a lot of value. There's also, obviously, he has a lot of But even if you can't flip the value, he has one of the highest upsides of any of the remaining players. So that's why I take him here. At the 112, we're going to be rounding out. Oops, sorry about your ears there. We're going to be rounding out this first round with another tight end. A guy that I don't understand why he's been falling in draft boards, both in the NFL and in fantasy, ever since the end of the college football season. This dude is just one of the most pure tight end prospects, going to a landing spot that I think is really, really good for him with the Las Vegas Raiders. Obviously, it's a system that does use a tight end heavily under Josh McDaniels, stepping back to his time in New England. And also, Jimmy Garoppolo is a quarterback who also is a big fan of using the tight end. I think with Foster Moreau now with the Saints and Darren Waller now with the Giants, they signed Austin Hooper, but I don't think Austin Hooper is going to be a true impediment to Michael Mayer getting on the field. And I believe his ability, not only as a pass catcher, but as a blocker, is going to let him be out on the field upward of 80% of snaps. And that's going to turn into a ton of opportunity. And I really, really like the consistency and value of Mayer here at the 112 position. Coming back down to start off, the second round is going to be our second tier break. I'm going to jump all the way down past all these wide receivers and take Bryce Young. Listen, there's a lot of good wide receivers: Mingo, Downs, Mims, Rice. Once you get into the second round of rookie picks, historically the hit rate for these guys is only 20 to 30%. And I'm sure one of these guys is going to be an excellent wide receiver, but three other people are going to be left holding the bag and be left holding bust of their second round pick. If you're stuck here at the 201 and maybe you don't have your quarterback position set, Bryce Young is the absolute safest player that is left on the board. He has a guaranteed floor of bringing you fantasy production, and being in a weaker NFC South conference, I think he has the pathway to generate and be kind of that Kirk Cousins player that, you know, he's not going to win you weeks. He's not going to win you games week in, week out, but he's certainly not going to lose you games. And is going to be an excellent fantasy asset for many, many, many years. Where we talk about shelf life of these players, I'm taking a guy that's going to have a shelf life of at minimum 5 years. So that's going to be the best value of your 201 pick here. But with that being said, now we don't have that guarantee, the high guarantee of a Bryce Young. So it's time to start taking some shots on some wide receivers. So this is a guy that you'll get a lot of takes. You'll see a lot of Downs fanboys, but I'm outlier on him based on size and also a third round capital. Marvin Mims, again, I'm not sold on Marvin Mims until they clear out some of the wide receiver room in there in Denver. So I'm going to go with Jonathan Mingo right here. I think something's to be said is the narrative of a rookie wide receiver that comes in with a rookie quarterback. They work to develop that rapport at rookie OTAs. It's already been said that Bryce Young and Jonathan Mingo already have a very strong connection, and at their first rookie camp, they went 5 for 5 with not a single drop pass from Mingo. I think with the other wide receiver room there in place in Carolina, it's really wide open. Adam Thielen passed on the wrong side of 30, does not threaten me at all. Terrace Marshall Jr., I think, will be off this team in a year. Never really had the chance to establish himself as a wide receiver threat. And DJ Chark is really a deep threat. I think Jonathan Mingo can really establish himself and honestly have a very productive rookie season. His long-term outlook is a little bit murkier as they try to add more offensive weapons post Terrace Marshall and Adam Thielen. But I think Jonathan Mingo does have a fairly high upside, and obviously he was the 5th wide receiver off the board at the beginning of the second round. So we're going to follow the draft capital as well as the opportunity for Mr. Mingo. At number 2 or 3, maybe this is a little spicy pick to some, but I'm going to go with Rishi Rice. This is absolutely the Kansas City bump in play. We saw last year, I made a now almost infamous tweet that Patrick Mahomes would throw it for over 4,000 yards and not a single wide receiver would get over 600 yards receiving. Now, most of them didn't. The only wide receiver to go over 600 yards was Juju Smith-Schuster, and he had about like 831 yards. But the tweet was right in theory. The process was correct, even if the result was wrong. I know I abhor people who say that, but theoretically, the tweet was right, where, you know, they have a ton of weapons, whether it's McKinnon, Pacheco. Last year, they had MVS, Mecole, Juju, Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, and then they have their flurry of tight ends and Blake Bell, Noah Gray, and Travis Kelce, obviously, is their most prominent receiving weapon. But they got rid of a bunch of those guys this offseason. They got rid of MVS, Mecole Hardman, and Juju. Obviously, they retained Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney. But with Rishi Rice, a guy that I think, again, you're going to take a shot. I'm going to take a shot on the offense that is most productive. Super Bowl champion, Kansas City, one of the most prolific offenses in the NFL. I think they were the number one rated offense in the 2022 season. Rishi Rice, again, apparently played catch with Patrick Mahomes prior to the draft, and Patrick said, hey, listen, I really like this guy. Go ahead and draft him for me. Obviously, I believe in Andy Reid as an offensive coordinator to really scheme open some targets and opportunities for Rishi Rice. And honestly, he could be the guy that jumps in and takes over a lot of those vacated targets, especially as Travis Kelce continues to get older in this offense. He can't, be that 1,400, 1,500 yard guy that he's been the past 5 years. So Rishi Rice, definitely going to take a shot on the upside here. 204, we'll continue our trend of spicy takes. We're going to go with, excuse me, Roshon Johnson. I love what Roshon Johnson brings to the table, even though he's not the next wide receiver off the board in terms of NFL draft capital, but he goes at the beginning of the 4th round to the Chicago Bears. This was their way to address David Montgomery leaving in free agency, and they do have Khalil Herbert, but he shouldn't be there for too much longer. Roshon Johnson, I think, is much more talented than people give him credit for just because he was stuck behind Bijan Robinson at Texas. And compared to the other running backs in this tier, whether it's Tajay Spears or Tank Bigsby, Roshon Johnson has a much clearer, much more palpable and quicker path to the field, especially in a run-dominant offense that's going to be led by Justin Fields and Matt Eberflus up there in Chicago. So I'm really in on Roshon Johnson. I am not ashamed to take him here at the 204. I'm honestly not even afraid to take him at the 202. That's how highly I value Roshon Johnson, and think he will be, kind of this year's Dameon Pierce, and I'm willing to put my stamp on that. Moving on, afterwards we're gonna do a little bit of run of. If I can find this guy. Yeah, there we go. There's Tajay. And then obviously after this, it's going to be a little bit of run of running backs. Tank Bigsby will be at the 206. Tajay Spears, Tank Bigsby. Again, we talk about, there's a lot of valuable wide receivers here, but one's going to hit. The other guy's going to be left holding the bag. The hit on running backs is slightly higher than the hit rate on wide receivers in the second round for fantasy. So I'm just going to play the odds and try to draft running backs here towards the middle of the second round, especially with two guys as talented as Tajay Spears and Tank Bigsby, and guys that both got day 2 draft capital. Tajay Spears edges out Tank Bigsby just because, despite the injury concerns, he is a guy that we've seen interest in the Titans to move off of Derrick Henry as soon as this offseason. He could be moved at the trade deadline, but most certainly I'll be betting my mortgage that they move off of Derrick Henry by next offseason. So Tajay Spears could easily be the RB1 in Tennessee come 2024 season. Tank Bigsby, while I think he's a tremendously talented player, you do have Travis Etienne, who's still on his rookie contract there and should be there for 2 more years, and if not 3, if they decide to pick up his 5th-year option, because Travis Etienne was a first-round draft pick under the notorious Urban Meyer. So Tank Bigsby, while I think he will be utilized, there was obviously some great production with both James Robinson and Travis Etienne on the field at the start of the season last year for Jacksonville, and Doug Peterson is a guy that does heavily utilize running back by committees and utilizes multiple running backs, and there is opportunity and value in both running backs. I think just the fact that Travis Etienne is going to be the number 1 guy is going to be, he is buddies with Trevor Lawrence. They went to Clemson together. I think is always going to be a little bit stymied opportunity for Tank Bigsby sitting behind Travis Etienne. And by the time Bigsby does have the opportunity to be an RB1, it might be too little too late, as he'll be entering his 4th NFL season potentially. So after that, we're going to get to our 3rd tier break. And this is where I'm going to go down and take a CJ Stroud. Again, I'm still more comfortable taking a quarterback, even in a 1 quarterback format, over the rest of the wide receivers here. I just think there's such volatility with guys that honestly aren't even your prototypical X wide receiver. They're all undersized. They're all pretty small. And they're all, again, coming into this year, it was valued as a very, very weak wide receiver class. And just because we're viewing this class in a vacuum shouldn't mean we should equate them to the value of similar capital wide receivers 2, 3, 4 years ago. We shouldn't look at Jaden Reed as the same value as a 2nd round wide receiver, like a caliber of a Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown, or DK Metcalf. It's important to look at these drafts holistically and compare them year over year. And we understand that this wide receiver draft class is much weaker than a lot of the draft classes in recent history. So that's why I'm going to go with CJ Stroud here. I think, again, a guy that was picked 102 in the NFL draft, potential franchise quarterback, a guy that does have the height, weight, athleticism, and should be playing in a scheme in Houston that's going to be trying to play catch up a lot of times. So he should be throwing the ball quite a bit, trying to put up a lot of points on the board to compensate for their abysmal defense. So I think with Stroud and the safety that he gives you at the quarterback position, he would be, the end of this kind of third tier of assets in a single quarterback league. I can't really say too much other than the fact that I value the floor of CJ Stroud more than the other assets that are coming after him here. So after this, I'm going to be going and taking a tight end. Still not going to be ready to take that dip on the wide receiver just yet. Sam LaPorta, a guy that's actually taken ahead of Michael Mayer. Again, I believe in the Detroit offense. It's why, again, I had Jahmyr Gibbs going 102 over Jackson Smith and Jigba. But, you had an incredible offensive mind, the offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, who had head coaching offers this past offseason. But he decided to turn them down and go back to Detroit because he wanted to build something special in Detroit. He had faith in the offense that they were running in Detroit. And honestly, it was a top 5 offense in terms of points and offense efficiency when all their players were healthy. And I think they got rid of TJ Hawkinson, and they had a plan for Sam LaPorta when they drafted him with the second pick of the second round. Again, very athletic tight end. I think a guy that I wouldn't be as high on if he wasn't landed with Detroit. And obviously just seeing their emphatic reaction to taking him and how much they have planned for him in this offense. I think he has a much safer floor and a much safer position within his respective offense than some of the guys afterwards. So Sam LaPorta comes off the board here at 208. At 209, we're going to try to dip our toes back into the wide receiver pool. And again, we're playing Russian roulette here with the rest of the wide receivers on the board. I'm going to go with Jalen Hyatt. Again, I gotta stay true to my personal rankings a little bit, and I love Jalen Hyatt and what he brings to the table for the Giants. Again, I don't understand why he was so devalued in the pre-draft process. Again, if you could scheme someone that wide open, why isn't every team doing that? There is something to be said for his ability to run routes and run himself 12 feet open past safeties and DBs in the SEC, for God's sake. This dude is talented. And also he goes to a great landing spot in the New York Giants. If there's anyone that I think can utilize his talents and make a scheme fit Jalen Hyatt, it's going to be Brian Dable, the same guy that traded for a 5'11 wide receiver who had trouble running routes, was called lackadaisical running routes, and Stephon Diggs when he brought him over to Buffalo and when Brian Dable was the offensive coordinator for Buffalo. So I think Jalen Hyatt could be, Brian Dable, Stephon Diggs. It's obviously a lofty NFL comparison, but in this offense, that's what I think Jalen Hyatt's ceiling is and why he might have the biggest bust potential of any wide receiver left. I'm just, at the end of the second round, I'm taking that upshot on a Jalen Hyatt. I loved him pre-draft. I love the landing spot, and I love the coaching staff that's going to be able to take advantage of his skill set. Moving on, at the 210, right here, I'm going to go with Jaden Reed. Again, you can only ignore draft capital for so long, and he was a sixth wide receiver off the board by the Green Bay Packers in the second round. They did get rid of both Randall Cobb and Allen Robinson and Allen Lazard this offseason, so not much competition for targets outside of Romeo Doubs as well as Christian Watson. Do I see a major long-term path for Jaden Reed? Not particularly. I think he's a good wide receiver 2, potentially a good wide receiver 3 in this offense. He has the ability to, make some outstanding weeks. Production wise, I'd comp him to maybe a Rondale Moore, where he's not going to be a starting wide receiver week in and week out, but he's going to have some boom weeks. He's going to have some multi-touchdown weeks, and he's just athletic enough to be involved in the game. So here I'm going to go with the draft capital and the opportunity that was left by the vacated targets of a lot of departing players for Green Bay, and take Jaden Reed. Moving on to the 210, I'm going to go, we'll start seeing these wide receivers come off the boards. 211 will be Josh Downs, and 212 will be Marvin Mims. Fantasy mirrors real life. It's really poetic that Marvin Mims goes the last pick of the second round in both the NFL and here in our mock draft. If the Broncos happen to move off of Courtland Sutton, if they happen to trade Courtland Sutton, or they happen to cut KJ Hamler, if that running back room becomes a little bit less crowded, then I'm willing to move Marvin Mims way up my ranks. I think I'd probably put him into the middle of the second round if they got rid of 2 of those guys. But right now, if he's sitting behind Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, and KJ Hamler, I just can't fathom the volume that's going to be given to a rookie wide receiver, especially with Sean Payton coming in and wanting to utilize the running back room. He's talked up Javonte Williams quite a bit. They brought in Samaje Perine. I just don't think the volume right now is there to sustain Marvin Mims. Obviously, if they get rid of some of their running backs and they clear up the opportunity path for Marvin Mims, he's definitely going to jump because I believe the talent is there. I believe he's a more talented wide receiver than Josh Downs. I just can't see him garnering more than 40 targets this year with the way the current state of affairs is on the Broncos roster. Josh Downs, again, super boomer bust prospect. I talked about this in my post-draft rankings. I'm not super high on Josh Downs, but you will find people who love his ability. So me personally, I take him here and try to trade him for assets or try to ask someone who wants to trade up and take Downs. I think he's honestly just going to be used as a guy to bring the top off the defense to open up running lanes in Indy for Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor. Frankly, if he is going to be a deep threat, you need to have someone that can get the ball down there with accuracy. I have no problems imagining Anthony Richardson getting the ball 60 yards down the field. I just have an issue with him doing it accurately, and especially with Josh Downs being 5'9", it's going to be harder for him to create separation and win at the catch point. When he's being covered by taller, bigger, stronger, faster DBs in the NFL. So I think Josh Downs is going to be a primary bust candidate. But, you have people who love him, and I would take him here at the end of the second round. Moving on to the 301, we're going to do a running back here, and that's going to be Chase Brown. A guy that I am betting on his opportunity going forward. Things don't look good right now, just with the way the depth charts is, and it seems that Joe Mixon, the Bengals brass, is taking their leisurely time getting Joe Mixon off the roster. But frankly, Joe Mixon could most certainly be cut this offseason, especially with the off-field legal trouble he's been getting into. And if he's gone, I think Chase Brown is talented enough, even despite him being a 5th-round draft pick, to definitely come in and secure that RB1 spot. I would be treating him very differently if you're a competing team versus a rebuilding team. I think he's a guy that if the Bengals do decide to cut Joe Mixon, Chase Brown will be very, very relevant this year, but they could look to replace him next year, given that they only invested 5th-round draft capital in him. Think more of a James Robinson-esque scenario with what happened to him his rookie year, and then they went and replaced him with Travis Etienne the next year. So if you're a competing team, I would definitely be okay reaching for Chase Brown over some of the wide receivers at the end of the second round, like a Downs or a Mims. And basically using him and maybe even a shorter shelf life than the typical running back with only a 1 year. You're buying him for this year and 1 year only and betting on Joe Mixon being cut. And if he is, then he will definitely be a great value here at the 301. At the 302, we're going to go back to the tight end pool. This is where I take Lucas Musgrave. I mean, I've heard differing reports coming out of camp. A lot of people say they like Tucker Kraft over Musgrave. Musgrave's going to be the move tight end, while Tucker Kraft will be the receiving tight end. I personally think it's the other way. As long as Musgrave can stay healthy, I think he should be the dominant pass catcher of this offense. I love the situation that he's in at Green Bay. We see rookie quarterbacks or first-year quarterbacks, in the case of Jordan Love, really rely on their tight ends as safety blankets. It's kind of the mantra that I've used to successfully scout the tight end position when I punt the tight end position. So last year, I went all in on Evan Ingram being the safety blanket for Trevor Lawrence. I also went in on, can't remember the one previous, but I know 3 years ago, I went in very heavily on Mark Andrews. The year he broke out is obviously the first year that Lamar Jackson was a starter for the Ravens. So I just think just following, rookie, younger quarterbacks and the tight ends that are paired to them, they typically have more success. And I think Lucas Musgrave, if he establishes himself as the receiver out of the 2 tight ends drafted for Green Bay, he's going to have a very, very valuable fantasy career as long as he can stay healthy. The health is a big question with Lucas Musgrave, but when he's on the field, he is more athletic and makes some of the most incredible catches you'll ever see by a tight end. Moving on, after Musgrave, it's going to be Cedric Tillman, a guy that I really, really liked coming into the pre-draft process, and a guy that I think really hurt himself coming back to school this past year. Obviously, he had an incredible 2021 season with, I believe it was 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns, but he got injured, and I think he tried to rush back to help his team towards the latter half of the 2022 season into the bowl game, and he just really did not have that same explosivity, that same speed that he had in 2021. I think with Cleveland, he's going to be a guy that surprises a lot of people. People are going to be wondering why Cedric Tillman fell to the 3rd round in the NFL draft if he's as good as he is on the NFL field. I think he's going to shock a lot of people and return to his 2021 form. I'm just not as sold on the Cleveland organization. Deshaun Watson has yet to prove to me that he is the same caliber of quarterback that he was with Houston. And obviously Amari Cooper at this current point in time is still the wide receiver 1. So until I can see Deshaun Watson become an active, not really an active quarterback, but, a top 12 quarterback in the NFL, I don't know. The Browns just really, they disgust me. I don't like drafting Browns. It just does not feel good drafting a Browns player. And I'm okay with going with my gut, especially in the 3rd round of rookie draft. At the 304, after Cedric Tillman, it's pretty clear that we're going to go with Luke Schoonmaker, tight end out of Michigan, going to Dallas. Again, just an incredible situation for Luke to land in. 2nd round draft capital goes to tight end who just goes to Dallas, who just shipped off Dalton Schultz. You're going to a system under Mike McCarthy that really heavily utilizes the tight end. Dalton Schultz was definitely a league winner for a lot of people 2 years ago before he suffered injuries last year. And Dak Prescott is definitely a quarterback that really utilizes the tight end. Going back and watching the tape of Luke at Michigan, he is definitely a very athletic tight end and is a great playmaker, having the ball in his hands and making plays after the catch. I think he's going to be very heavily utilized in that Dallas offense and might have the ability to maybe break out a little bit sooner than the historical tight end hit rates. So I'm very happy taking opportunity on the Dallas tight end here. Honestly, any tight end that went to Dallas, I think would have been very high on my list as a landing spot that really boosted their capital. 305 after Luke Schoonmaker. I'm going to go with Zach Evans. Again, out of the rest of these calibers of quarterbacks, or the rest of these skill position players, this is just a guy that I think has the most palpable path to the field. He goes to a very, very depleted depth chart in the Los Angeles Rams, who ahead of him, it really is only Cam Akers, and Cam Akers almost got cut from the roster last year. Cam Akers has dealt with quite a bit of injuries, especially to his Achilles. So we know that really decreases the shelf life of a running back. If Cam Akers does happen to fumble the ball or get on Sean McVay's bad side for the umpteenth time, you could see Zach Evans come in and be a starting runner back as early as 4th or 5th week into the season. So I think this is a guy that, despite the very mediocre draft capital, has the clearest path to the field of anyone remaining. So I'm taking the shot on here. Some would say early. I would say probably a little bit late. I don't mind taking a shot on him a little bit earlier in the 3rd round, just because of how clear his path to the field is. But Zach Evans, as a prospect I wasn't high on, just again a benefit of landing in a really, really good opportunity in Los Angeles. Here at the 306, we're going to go with Izzy Akunne. Where is Izzy? Again, another very talented running back. I just think with how crowded that running back room is in New York, he's not going to have a ton of opportunity. He's going to be kind of, it's poetic that Tank Bigsby goes up to 206 and Akunne is at the 306 because they're going to be suffering the same fate. They're going to be stuck behind the RB1s for the next 2 to 3 years. Breece Hall clearly is the guy that the Jets put a ton of draft capital into, and as long as he can stay healthy, it might take him a little bit to come back from that ACL injury last year. But with that being said, he's the undisputed wide running back 1. And by the time Izzy Akunne, despite him being a talented running back, has the opportunity to be a running back 1 in this offense, it might be towards the end or after his shelf life, as we normally evaluate running back shelf life in Dynasty for about 2 to 3 years. And Akunne will be looking for a new contract at the same time Breece Hall's contract is up, just given off of their draft capital. After Akunne, I'm going to do something that's going to shock a ton of people. A guy that I really wasn't high on pre-draft, a guy that I was so out, a guy that I didn't think was going to get this draft capital, but he got 3rd round draft capital, day 2 draft capital, and that's going to be Tank Dell. Again, a guy that is insanely undersized for the position at 5'8", but if he was 6 feet tall, we talking about him as a generational prospect. His start-stop ability is incredible. His play after the catch is absolutely insane. He absolutely torched the Senior Bowl, and a guy that I think in a very depleted wide receiver room in Houston, they have basically the ghost of Robert Woods. John Mechie is coming back from leukemia. Nico Collins hasn't really established himself in that offense. And listen, CJ Stroud went out and apparently told the Houston Texans organization after drafting him, hey, go get Tank Dell. I really want him as a wide receiver. So again, we're going to do the same Mingo to Bryce Young narrative, Tank Dell to CJ Stroud narrative. And just kind of based off, again, day 2 draft capital. He may be undersized, but he's very talented. We've seen players carve out a niche for themselves despite being undersized, like a Rondale Moore. I am a little partial to Rondale Moore, but I can see Tank Dell having a similar career. And if that's the career he has, that's definitely a value in the middle of the 3rd round, where normally you're drafting people that you're cutting halfway through the season. After Tank Dell, a wide receiver of more normal stature in the NFL. That's going to be Michael Wilson. The reason why he comes after Tank Dell is just for the fact that he has tremendous injury concerns, had a tremendous trouble staying on the field at Stanford. But when he was on the field, by God, this man was an incredible wide receiver. Very, very talented. Very precise route runner, wins at the catch point, goes up and aggressively takes contested catches, and he goes to Arizona. That I think is actually a good landing spot for Michael Wilson. He was a day 2 draft capital, so we do like to see the draft capital there for Michael Wilson. And I think the numbers, the days are numbered for DeAndre Hopkins in Arizona. He came out and said, who said I ever wanted to leave Arizona? But I think it's pretty clear that the Cardinals want to move on from him, preferably this offseason. But if not, he won't be on the team next year. Rondale Moore, his contract is up after this year, and Marquise Brown, well, if the Cardinals decide to take a new direction next year with Kyler Murray, and they have the overall pick, and they want to go with a new direction to Caleb Williams and ship off Kyler Murray, seems like they're going to ship off his buddy and Marquise Brown as well. So Michael Wilson has an ability to come in and be a very solid wide receiver 2 for them after we see a lot of the clutter in their wide receiver room clear up. This is a guy that's a prime taxi squad candidate, where I'm drafting him, putting him on the squad for this year, and just seeing how things play out with the Cardinals come next offseason. Hopefully he, finds himself a very good niche in a vacated wide receiver room as they try to recreate their team down there in Phoenix. After Michael Wilson, we'll take a shot on Kayshon Boutte. Actually, I'm going to pivot here a little bit. I'm going to switch him with the next guy that I have, which is going to be Dwayne McBride. Live pivot here. Going to go to Dwayne McBride. It's just the rumors coming out of Minnesota currently is that Dalvin Cook's time there is all but done. They're looking to trade him. There's rumors of him going to Miami. There's rumors of him going to Buffalo. Honestly, he could be cut if he doesn't agree to a pay. He could be a June 1st cut if he doesn't agree to a pay cut given his current contract. So all signs that I am reading into are saying that he's going to be off the roster, meaning Alexander Mattison would step up to the RB1, and Dwayne McBride, who is a very talented running back out of UAB, moves up to the RB2. Alexander Mattison has proven that he can't be an RB1 for a full season, so this could be makes it a very easy path. If Dalvin Cook is gone, that Dwayne McBride's value is going to skyrocket. I think here at the end of the 3rd round in single QB drafts, taking him before Dalvin Cook is cut is going to be a tremendous value. You can probably even flip him after Dalvin Cook is cut for a 2nd rounder next year, because people will see him very likely as a talented running back, a younger guy who can come in and surpass Alexander Mattison with very little effort. After that, we'll go ahead and take Kayshon Boutte, a player that I despise, honestly. I feel disgusting every time I draft Kayshon Boutte. But again, we're just going to go here. He lands in the Patriots, which is a good yet bad situation. We've known the Patriots' knack for drafting wide receivers is deplorable, and developing wide receiver talent is even worse than that. However, this is a guy that was a projected first round fantasy pick last year, and we know the talent is there. He set the single game receiving record for the SEC. If he can somehow dip into that talent, and if Bill Belichick can get him, on the right track, I certainly believe that he could potentially be a good wide receiver. Maybe he's a steal here at the end of the 3rd for fantasy football, but I think his road to becoming fantasy relevant is a long shot at best, as there's currently rumors that due to his work ethic, he could not be on the team come the start of training camp. After Kayshon Boutte, a guy that I'm honestly just really wanting to take a shot on, Sean Tucker, a guy that fell, similar to Kayshon Boutte, was projected 1st round rookie draft, even in Superflex, as in the last year's offseason, but is again taking a tumble in this draft cycle. Again, hampered by a ton of injury concerns as well as going undrafted. But I think the talent is still there. Sean Tucker is still an incredibly productive running back at Syracuse, a guy that has track star speed, has incredible hands, one of the best catchers of the football here. And we know pass catching running backs are a cheat code for fantasy football. And even though he was a UDFA, he did go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who let go over Leonard Fournette. And as of this video, have not re-signed him, but they only have Rachaad White, who is purely a bruising running back, in between the tackles running back. So Sean Tucker could honestly, as long as his health concerns and heart condition and other injuries that are ailing him don't take him out of, don't take him off the team or make him a liability to the point where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers cut him, he could honestly be very active in the backfield for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I'm taking that shot every day and twice on Sunday at the end of the third round of a guy like this. Honestly, I would not be upset if you wanted to try to take a shot on him in the middle of the third round as well. Rounding out the third round is going to be Brenton Strange. Again, has the the day 2 draft capital going to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Jacksonville, honestly, they put Evan Ingram on the franchise tag. They could walk away from him after this year. If Brenton Strange shows enough development in year 1 as a rookie, he could be the go-forward tight end in this offense, tied to one of the most prolific quarterbacks of this era in Trevor Lawrence. So at the end of the third round here, definitely taking a shot on a guy that could be tied to Trevor Lawrence as the tight end 1 after this year. Again, another prime taxi candidate. Fourth round, let's try to rapid fire this. Going back to quarterback, everyone after this, we've talked about a ton of upside, a lot of, very palpable path to the field. I love that alliteration. But after this, it's really, really murky. So I'm taking Will Levis here. Again, essentially day 1 draft capital. Goes at the very, very tippy top of round 2. It's been pretty clear that the Titans are going to move on from Ryan Tannehill either this offseason or next offseason, and Will Levis, again, was a projected top 5 overall draft pick at one point this past offseason. So here in the start of the 4th round, I don't think it's wild at all to take a shot on Will Levis and see if he develops into anything. At the 402, the personal wide receiver out of the Texans that I would prefer is Xavier Hutchinson, a guy that, despite it going 3 rounds later than Tank Dell, I think is more prototypical wide receiver size. Again, a guy out of Iowa State who I think was a little underrated based on his quarterback play and the absolute abysmal state of the Iowa State Cyclones this past year. But again, going to a very depleted wide receiver room in Houston, he's a guy that does all the little things right, runs routes really well, doesn't really drop a lot of balls. I think he's going to find himself a really nice niche down there in Houston. At the 403, we're going to go with another late round wide receiver, and that's going to be A.T. Perry, going to the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, a major transition year for New Orleans. They restructured Michael Thomas, but honestly, with his injury history and with the state of his current contract, they could be seeing Michael Thomas walk sooner rather than later. And I think A.T. Perry comes in and is honestly more talented than Rashid Shaheed. He could slot in very easily as the number 2 option to Chris Olave. Chris Olave is a smaller speedster. A.T. Perry is more of that big-bodied, big-frame wide receiver that goes up and wins at the catch point. He was very touted coming into the season. Kind of a disappointing 2022 collegiate football season, but maybe a guy that can resurrect some of his 2021 and 2020 performance in the NFL in the right scheme. And I believe New Orleans should be a very wide receiver friendly team for him to go to. After this, honestly, I'm just going to follow production. I'm going to go with Deuce Vaughn. Again, a statistical outlier, one of the smallest players, if not the smallest player at the Combine in the history of the Combine, coming in at 5'5". I just can't doubt the fact that he was insanely productive at Kansas State. He had back-to-back years of 1,300 yards. I mean, he's a fantastic pass catcher. He understands the limitations of his size and actually exploits his size to his advantage. Obviously, Tony Pollard is the unquestioned running back 1 in Dallas, and Malik Davis will be the running back 2, but I think Deuce Vaughn should find some ability for himself to wiggle onto the field in some passing down sets. I don't think he's going to have the success that he had in college, but if the Dallas, as of now, they haven't re-signed Zeke, they haven't signed any other running backs to take over, so Tony Pollard is clearly number 1. But he is getting older. Malik Davis slots at number 2, and Deuce Vaughn, I mean, again, he was productive, and the biggest translator of fantasy production is in the NFL was fantasy production in college, and Deuce Vaughn, he had that fantasy production. He was just a very scrappy player that managed to pick up a ton of yards and was a really, really good hard runner. could maybe find himself a nice niche in Dallas. After Deuce Vaughn, I'm going to go with Hendon Hooker. Obviously, not that big of a surprise coming very soon after Will Levis. If you're going to take the shot on Will Levis, you might as well take the shot on Hendon Hooker. I do like Hendon Hooker slightly more than Will Levis personally, just because I think their situations are almost mirrored in Tennessee as well as Detroit. They're both going to have to sit for a year, and they're going to come in as the starter in 2024, potentially, after Tennessee lets go of Ryan Tannehill and the Lions let go of Jared Goff. If they don't sign him to extension, the talks of him getting an extension are absolutely wild. But I think just as far as the situation they're landing themselves into next year, Hendon Hooker has it much, much better. Obviously, an offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, that I have much more confidence in, as well as more offensive weapons to help him be successful. Also, I like Hendon Hooker. The maturity and experience that he has on the collegiate field should help make that transition to the NFL much smoother. After Hendon Hooker, we're going to go with a guy that I was super high on pre-draft, and that's Parker Washington. I am helmet scouting a little bit wide receivers out of Penn State. I just think whatever they do, they just give them that special sauce or that special juice from Space Jam. Whatever they do, they just are excellent catchers of the football. Their drop rates are minuscule. They are guys that, they are beautifully run routes. They're so polished when it comes to their cuts and making sure that they are, again, polished route running, as well as just very pretty catching of the ball. It looks effortless. They have very little body catches, and this is a guy that says he wants to be used like a Deebo Samuel Light, taking runs out of the runs out of the backfield. And frankly, there's a lot of competition for targets and volume in Jacksonville, which is why he's so low on this list. But again, I'm going to just give him the bump and say he's just that talented that he deserves to be at least here in the 4th round and picked up. After this, I'm going to go with a tight end way down the line here, Zach Coons. I like him over a lot of the remaining tight ends just because I think his path to the field is more palpable than the rest. We've seen New York Jets go in quite a bit on tight ends in the past few years, whether it's Irv Smith or CJ Uzomah, and none of them really seem to pan out. So they do have a gaping position at the tight end. I actually thought they were going to address tight end much earlier on in this draft, potentially in the 2nd round, but they waited till the 7th round to draft Zach Coons. But I think that is a tremendous value. He's obviously similar to a Quentin Johnson, and he's not an athletic tight end. He's an athlete that plays tight end. So if they have a good offensive system in place to help develop the talent, he could be a very, very useful tight end and rapidly vault himself into tight end 1 status for the New York Jets. Also, we've seen historically that Aaron Rodgers in the red zone throws to tight ends at has a target percentage in the red zone at 18%, which is double the NFL average. So he does utilize tight end sets quite a bit more and targets tight ends quite a bit more in the red zone. So having that touchdown upside for Zach Coons, I think, is very, very desirable. Next 2 guys, it's basically take your poison. Eric Gray and Evan Hull. 2 guys that, they're very talented running backs. They were taken. They should slot in as really high-end backups for Indianapolis and New York Giants for Hull and Gray, respectively. I like Gray a little bit more just because Jonathan Taylor is still on his contract, while Saquon Barkley is on the franchise tag, so maybe he has a little bit more palpable path to the field. God, I'm going to be horrified how many times. If someone wants to play a drinking game, just take a shot every time I say palpable path to the field, and you might be blacked out by now. But I think Eric Gray, more clear road to the field. See? I do know how to vary my sentence structure. And then Evan Hull is just going to be stuck behind Jonathan Taylor. They did get rid of Zach Moss and Naeem Hines, so he should just be a very high-end backup that I'm going to take a shot at here. Last 3 guys, let's breeze through them. Wide receiver, Charlie Jones for... not going to work here. All right, so we can't type it in. Yep, there we go. Charlie Jones, a wide receiver out of Purdue that went to Cincinnati. I think they're moving on from Tyler Boyd sooner rather than later. We've seen the Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Burrow not shy away from 3 wide receiver sets. I think Charlie Jones can slot in immediately as that deep threat speedster guy. He was very, very productive at Purdue, just cooking cornerbacks and every other DB in sight. I think he's going to have some big blow-up games, and honestly, if we see injuries to T. Higgins or if T. Higgins potentially moves to a new team because the Bengals can't pay him, Charlie Jones, great deep threat. Think of him as like a DJ Chark light. After that, Rakim Jarrett. This is obviously quite a bit of bias on my part, because I am from Maryland. I did not go to UMD, but I am from Maryland, and I'm a very strong supporter of the Terrapins. Love my Terrapins. Love Rakim Jarrett. Think he's insanely talented. It is absolutely baffling that this man went undrafted. Maybe there was just a mix-up in the NFL draft process, because I was looking throughout the draft. I was looking on the ESPN app, and it said best prospects available, and Rakim Jarrett was not listed as a prospect that you could draft on the ESPN draft board. So that's wild. But he goes to Tampa Bay, and listen, Chris Godwin, excellent wide receiver. Mike Evans, excellent wide receiver. Both of their days, I think they're numbered. I think they're both getting a little bit older, and they'll probably be moving on from him as we see. Tom Brady is gone. He's not coming back to the NFL. It was announced that he's going to be a minority owner of the Las Vegas Raiders. So he has moved on to the next stage of his football career. I don't think the future plan is either Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield. I think there's going to be a massive rebuild coming in for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they could be moving on from Chris Godwin as well as Mike Evans pretty soon. So Rakim Jarrett, I just think is just insanely talented. He might not ever be even a wide receiver too, but a guy that can come in, maybe be a solid wide receiver for them and has a path to the field. And I just love the talent of Rakim Jarrett and think he was just really undervalued. And once they move on from, they've already moved on from Julio Jones. They're going to move on from Russell Gage. They're going to move on from Evans. And who else is left? It's going to be Rakim. And I think he'll have a chance to actually prove what he's worth. And finally, at the 412, it's time for a fun pick. We're going to do the same fun pick that we did. Obviously, if Dorian Thompson-Robinson, obviously a better pick than the guy that I'm going to go for, but Malik Cunningham, for the same exact reason that I drafted him in the Superflex mock draft. Bill Belichick and his obsession with dual threat QBs is just, it's incredible. He talks about Lamar Jackson like he's his own son, even before the whole Lamar Jackson potentially being traded era that happened this offseason. He's brought in a bunch of dual threat guys like a Cam Newton. And honestly, Malik Cunningham got one of the biggest UDFA contracts in the history of the NFL. That was honestly commensurate with a late fourth, early fifth round pick. So honestly, Malik did a great job for himself not getting drafted. And if really the rift between Mac Jones and Bill Belichick is as vast as the media is reporting it to be, Malik Cunningham could be the next great late round quarterback that comes in and dominates for the New England Patriots. And I just think, again, the kid is just a ton of maturity, insane football IQ, dual threat quarterback that what you love to see. So he's my fun pick at 412. Obviously, he'll go UDFA. I'll pick him up as UDFA because, fun pick. But that's going to wrap up my single quarterback draft. Yep. We didn't manage to stay under an hour. This one went quite a bit longer than I anticipated, but this one was a lot more fun. I'm going to go back. We're going to do some more drafts after rookie mini camps, after OTAs, because we know some of my leagues, the rookie drafts don't happen until June. Some people posted rookie drafts off until July, trying to get as much value and information as they possibly can for rookie drafts. So we're gonna drag out these rookie mock drafts as long as possible, milk them for all the content they're worth, because I love doing them and people love watching them. So with that being said, hope you enjoyed this draft as much as I did. I really had a lot of fun doing this one, and definitely makes me want to do some more mock drafts in the future. Let me know down below in the comments what you thought, if you agree, if you disagree, and your takes on some of these players. And as always, I'll see you around and take care.